On this podcast, you'll find interviews with high-performing, successful individuals in life sciences. On a weekly basis, we cover their proven methods, principles, strategies, and mindsets to implement new technologies that scale to meet the needs of people in our world.
Welcome to 2024 and the first Life Science Success podcast of the year. And so I'm really excited to be here and to get to start the year again with a very exciting topic. Today we're going to talk about immunology and T-cell therapy. And so for those of you who don't know me, my name is Don Davis. I'm a consultant in life sciences, and I focus in on helping companies with strategy, people, process, and technology, really focused around scaling organizations. And so I'm excited today to be joined by Nigel. Hold on one second. Let me just bring up the scene here. So Nigel McCracken and James Forrester are both from Virax Labs. And I'm really excited to get into this topic. I have a lot to learn about this topic, and really excited overall to be here. Sorry, James, it looks like you're muted currently. Hold on one second. There we go. Now you could go ahead and say, sorry, that was on my side, a technical glitch.
Don't worry about it. No, we're just saying we're very happy to be here, Don. Happy to talk about, our various platforms, our T-cell platform, in particular Virax. I mean, we're very excited about it, and we're happy to kind of dive into the details on that with you today with all of your viewers.
Perfect. So, James, why don't we just start with you? Could you just tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and what your role is? I haven't mentioned that either at Virax.
Yeah, sure. So I'm the CEO of Virax. I've been with the company in its various guises for around 10 years now. I was one of the co-founders in the very first days. I started my career actually in finance, but I was actually sort of most fundamentally interested in becoming ultimately an entrepreneur in my career. And ideally, as an entrepreneur, you want to be a founder, of course. I was always really interested in the technology space and biotech in particular, and hence what happened with Virax, and if indeed that was going to be possible, given the changing dynamic of global business generally speaking. So I think entrepreneurship's always been a real passion of mine from a young age. It's where I had started small entrepreneurial business projects as a student in my university days. I started off in finance, in big corporate. Fortunately, sort of later on in my career, I was able to pivot more into entrepreneurial focused endeavors, and that ultimately led me into biotech and diagnostics more specifically. I found that industry, as I'm sure you know, Don, to be very compelling and robust, and has been so for a number of years and will continue to be. I think my pivot out of finance was certainly made easier by the financial crisis in 2008, 2009. That sort of on a philosophical basis made me more inclined to focus more in what I thought was more my core interests and around entrepreneurship, as I mentioned, and away from sort of big corporate realm finance. And I haven't really looked back in that respect. In terms of specifics myself, I've been most recently focused on product development within the technology and consumable space in previous years. But primarily what I've always really been focused on as a founder is I've been most interested in creating a mission-driven company, looking at solving big world problems. I was initially drawn to biotech and diagnostics as a result of that, because of the ability for a company or something that I could found that would affect everyday people's lives at scale. And that was really the main thesis behind the founding of what became known as Virax and my role as CEO. And what we're trying to specifically achieve is our core mission within the company. We believe our work at Virax in combating long COVID and chronic fatigue could assist in benefiting patient outcomes, on a potentially massive scale. And that's really exciting for both me and I think for Nigel and the whole of our team. I'm not sure if you're aware, but approximately 19 million people in the US and 38 million people in Europe are affected by long COVID, which is what we're currently looking at developing at this point in time. And there's no available diagnostic test for doctors to assist patients with it. And so the pressing need for a diagnostic or a piece of technology to assist with patient outcomes is of high priority for governments, healthcare providers, drug companies all around the world. I mean, this literally affects millions of people every day. And if Virax is able to assist in some way in improving those outcomes through our diagnostics technique, this is really what I set out to do in those early days when I was founding Virax, and certainly as my continuing role as CEO, as the mission of the company continues to kind of develop and change. Where we want to take the company specifically, and myself as CEO, is to build out a comprehensive set of immune profiling IVDs, and this is what we sort of referred to in the early part of the piece. And those are focused on early diagnosis of post-viral syndromes and indications associated with chronic inflammation and T-cell exhaustion. And it's our intention to ultimately enable early treatment interventions alongside that. And so if those early treatment interventions can assist in saving or improving lives on a significant basis, that's sort of what Virax and my role as CEO is what we're fundamentally about. And if we can make money in the process of doing that, then that's all the better.
Very good. And Nigel, could you just give us a little background on yourself as well, and it'd be interesting to hear kind of what led you to Virax as well.
Yeah, sure. No problem at all. So my name's Nigel McCracken. I'm the COO at Virax. I've been with the company about 5 months. Just a little bit about my background. I'm a drug developer, so I've been worked in drug development for the last 30 years. I studied biochemistry pharmacology at university, did a PhD in drug metabolism, and later on, a little bit later on, I got a wee bit bored and I did a master's in clinical pharmacology. So I'm a pharmacologist by training, and I've always been interested in the interactions between living organisms and drugs that affect both the normal and abnormal biological function. We talk about abnormal, we're talking really about disease sort of thing. So, following my PhD, did a postdoc in pharmacogenetics, which was around, the field of drug metabolism. And then I transitioned into drug pharma, into the pharmaceutical industry, worked at Abbott in the US, then I had about 15 years in Switzerland as well. But, initially within drug metabolism, but then within translational medicine. So I headed up a number of translational medicine teams, was very much introduced to biomarkers. I've worked across a lot of different indications, but certainly in the last 15 years, very much concentrated on oncology and infectious disease. And even within infectious disease, certainly the latter couple of years within COVID as well. And what you realize, and certainly what I realized, because again, I was developing companion diagnostics to go along with the actual drugs themselves. But what you realize both within oncology as well as infectious disease, early detection, and around the disease progression, as well as the role of the immune system and how it interacts and deals with pathogens. And when we talk about pathogen, whether it's a cancer or whether it's a viral, a bacterial pathogen, is super, super important. And this is where it sort of led me to, initially doing drug development, but then taking all of that knowledge and to say, actually, it's just as important to diagnose early before your immune system or before your body completely rewires itself to the point where it can't come back. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where I was really interested about what Virax Biolabs were trying to do around T cells, and whether we could actually look at T cell, and as James mentioned, T cell exhaustion, to see if we could actually have an early intervention, and try and diagnose those certainly viral infections, those post-viral syndromes early, before the body actually gets to that stage where you can't go back. Because it's hardwired itself. You've got this general chronic inflammation, this general T-cell exhaustion, causing a number of symptoms that we're seeing, certainly in long COVID. But long COVID is just something that is front and present at the moment. People have been living with these chronic fatigue and chronic inflammation things for many, many years. When we think about ME or any other sort of viral syndromes like Epstein-Barr or cytomegalovirus and things like that.
Yeah. So, I mean, it'll be so interesting to watch, right? I mean, I feel like this is a phenomenal time to be in life sciences because of the technology that we have, and there's still so much more that we have to learn. So it's a bit of a double-sided, argument here that, yes, we are in the best spot ever. And then secondarily, we still have so much further to go. Yeah.
No,
So,
you're completely right, because when you think about just cancer or even viral or bacterial, it's complex,
mm-hmm.
and it's very. Think about the immune or the adaptive immune system and how it actually interacts with these pathogens. It is complex, but as you say, I think the way the technology to be able to look at different data sets is crucial to where we want to go in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, James, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add I was just going to add over and above that. And again, I think we'll get into the sort of the technical piece at a later point. But one interesting point, sort of facet around our Virax Immune platform is the fact that it's highly adaptable. And to your life sciences point, things are moving and changing so quickly. And part of what we feel is an advantage of both our platform as Virax Immune specifically, as well as Virax as a company, is that we're highly adaptable at how we approach things. So as things change, day to day, week to week, viruses are, metamorphosizing in so many different ways. We feel as though we build a platform where we can be at the forefront of assisting with these kind of early diagnostic techniques that Nigel was referring to, because of the adaptability of our platforms and the adaptability of our company as a general point, because that we see that as one of our key strengths and will be in the long-term future.
So important. So in terms of, James, I wanted to stay with you. So in terms of, building companies, my understanding looking at your profile is that this isn't your first company either. And I wanted to just kind of dive in a little bit in terms of the key challenges and learning experiences that you encountered while co-founding Emerging Asia Capital and then the Natural Source Group.
Yeah, sure. Happy to do so. I mean, there was other, to be frank, there was other ventures prior to that were less successful that I like to go into less detail about, but but
we learn the most from the less successful ones, to be fair as well. Yeah, but go ahead.
No, I would 100% agree with that. I think that this whole notion of this sort of unicorn, this Mark Zuckerberg type scenario coming out of Harvard, and you set up your first business and it turns into a multi-billion, that's not the regular journey or pathway by any means. It's just not. And I think my pathway is a pretty good example of that. As I said earlier in the piece, I've been setting up sort of little business ventures here or there since I was a student at college, or university, as we call it in the UK. So I've been doing this for many years, and in many different guises and in different areas, all tech focused, I should add. But it's a really bumpy journey, and it's like it's a big iceberg. Folks only see that top of that iceberg. They never see the hard work that goes below all of it, which is underneath the sea. And that would be a really good kind of metaphor for my journey. And I think if I was going to be helpful for the folks kind of logging into your show and maybe wanting to pick up one or two things from me and my journey, generally speaking, about in business and in entrepreneurship, I think for me the most critical and most important thing that I picked up or that I've learned over the years is, and this is just very high level and broadly speaking, would be the value of grit and resilience within a founder. It might be a really obvious truism, or maybe it won't. I'm not 100% sure. But what I found is the reality from my experiences, and I can say it firsthand, is these business plans, these ideas that you have for you have a 1, 3, 5 year plan for execution, and almost in an early stage business, such as ours or anyone's, it almost never goes that way, and your ability to kind of react and adapt your processes and procedures as a result of that, and your resilience in doing so, in my view, is kind of the most important factor as if you're going to look at becoming a founder or an entrepreneur in the future, as a future barometer for future success, in my opinion. But I think if you're looking at the challenges specifically with the companies that you mentioned, I think, and again, sort of speaking rather broadly, I think the most important part, and these are sort of tech-focused ventures, obviously, is really focusing in on that unique value proposition. And again, I know it's a sort of maybe perhaps a truism for your viewers, but in all the businesses that I worked in previously, that necessarily wasn't the heart of what some of the other founders that I was working with were looking at doing. And what became clear in everything that we were doing is that if that innovation within the core of the business, and your USP wasn't of such a significant scale, then that business was never going to become anything significant. That was just the bottom line. And you would be surprised how many times you would enter into a sort of founder entrepreneurial situation where that USP isn't put into the middle of what you're trying to achieve. You would be very surprised. And Virax is another good example of really innovation is the heart of everything that we do. And Nigel's very helpful in that respect. From a scientific basis, because we put that in the core of everything that we're trying to achieve here. Because if it's not, the questions we ask ourselves specifically are, what problem are we solving? How big is that problem? Is the product or the diagnostic in this particular case we're providing, is it unique? Can we deliver this at scale? Is the addressable market such that if we were to deliver at scale, does the business model make sense? So there's 100 different questions and kind of objectives to consider yourself as a founder. And so I think folks, when they think of a founder and an entrepreneur, they think of it as this really, I wouldn't say they think it's easy, but they have this notion where you come up with this idea, and it's simple, it's basic. You put together some code, and there you go. You have your $1 billion unicorn moonshot, and the reality is it's just not like that. And in a lot of ways, you have to be more competitive. Like I said, I worked in a corporate environment as well. You have to be better than those corporate folks. Mm-hmm. A lot of the time in entrepreneurship, you have to work harder than them. You have to work more, longer hours than they do, which you perhaps wouldn't necessarily expect going into that business. And that's something that I've really learned over the last 5, 10, 15 years, for sure. In terms of the challenges that I went through, and I was thinking of this prior to the show. In terms of, to your point, scalability, how to achieve that scale from a strategic perspective. I think one of the biggest things from my perspective would be building a team and staffing. That's really been the critical thing. Bringing that idea once again from a relatively small team scenario to 1,000, 5,000 person organization, which is where we hope to bring Virax. That's really the key. It's in that execution, and that execution piece is really based around that staffing piece. If you can't get that staffing piece right, once again, to my previous point, that USP point, that innovation point, if you can't execute upon it, then it's just an idea, nothing more, and ultimately, that business perhaps won't succeed as a result of that. So there's so many different parts and facets, and we could sit and probably talk about this for 2-3 days, and maybe your audience don't want to hear about that. But those are just my my brief takes from a high level of what I think the most important sort of challenges are, and what I've had to deal with specifically firsthand in my business dealings over these many years.
Yeah, I mean, it brings up a really good point, because a lot of founders I've had similar conversations where you need somebody that's focused on the North Star. Where are you going, overall from a strategic standpoint? But that's where the role of the COO, where to me, Nigel's role really is most critical, in this overall play, because you need somebody thinking about, okay, that's fine that you have kind of this vision to get to somewhere in the future. However, there are a lot of other pieces that have to be built along the way. And if somebody's not focusing on those tactical components of how do I build these other parts of the organization, you may get there in terms of the science, but you won't have a business, to your kind of broader point, in the end. What you'll have is a very nice science project that, might be great in academia, but honestly, isn't really a business. And so, I think it's a really critical point that you're bringing up.
Yeah, I mean, and to your point, I mean, that was part of our rationale. Nigel was coming into the company, about 5 months ago now, and that was really what we were trying to do with Nigel was to bring, in terms of Virax Immune specifically, from the lab and bring that forward, through the various regulatory paths and so on into commercialization. And that was a big reason why Nigel was to come in and assist us as COO. So no pressure, Nigel. But we're hoping.
Love a challenge. Love a challenge. No, I mean you bring up a good point. When you think about the strategic goals, they're focused, and as James said, they're focused on the need and they're focused on the opportunity. And and when you think about how you achieve those goals, it's all about understanding and mapping out the process and the deliverables. And the most important thing, it's about effective decision making. So the regulatory approval just doesn't happen by itself. There's a number of things that happen beforehand, and it's when you get to that decision point, and this is the thing that usually kills biotechs, is the time that they take to go to the next point.
Yep.
And I think what we need to do, and go back to what my role is, and because I've been there and we've got a really good team who have developed diagnostics, but it's not just the development of the diagnostics, it's the understanding of the science behind it. The clinical study, when you're interacting with your KOLs and you're designing that clinical study, you're interacting with the regulatory to make sure that the outcomes within your clinical study are being met for approval. If you don't have an understanding of that, then it becomes a bit of a problem, because then what you have is you get to these points and you don't have the information to go seamlessly to the next point. And that's, I guess, where the experience that I sort of bring from working certainly in infectious disease, working, and interacting with the FDA. Okay, a lot of the stuff I've done is around companion diagnostics to go with it. But it's pretty much exactly the same. As long as you know the process and obviously because we want to manufacture the test itself, there's a whole process manufacturing thing that we have to build into that. But the good thing is as James was saying, we've got a great team, and it's a team that's basically done this before, sort of thing. And it's just making sure all of those things, are, you've got them mapped out, and basically you make decisions quickly. And and then you move, and you move that sort of project on, and we're super excited about that, because as James said, there's a huge potential need both for the individual but also for society, because things like COVID and stuff, or even bacterial, they're not going away. It's only going to get more. And with that, even though we will have vaccines and stuff that will most probably, hopefully, will deal with those infections that are coming up, these post-viral syndromes, or that chronic inflammation, the T-cell exhaustion, these will only become more and more. And you can see it in society, that it's a huge burden, because people can't work, they can't do anything, sort of thing. And the question here is, all the diagnosis for most post-viral syndromes, it's basically self-diagnosed, because there's nothing there to test. Right. And this is a thing we feel that there's a real potential here to work alongside the general practitioners, to work alongside the virologists and stuff like that, to provide them with insightful information to help with the early management of those patients who actually have these post-viral syndromes.
So Nigel, I wanted to stay with you for just a second in terms of some of the things that you just covered. Your career at Beargen Bio, ASA, and New Canna PLC, do you feel like that experience really kind of, is helping you sort of look at this broader landscape and where the company needs to go? Because, I mean, these are obviously, organizations that are a little further along than where Virax is currently. And so, my guess is that you've got, some history that's adding here as well.
Yeah, I think that for me, it was a nice transition. Before, I'd worked in pharma, big size, mid size pharma, where you're maybe a couple of layers below the people who are making all the decisions and stuff. Um, certainly, when I moved to the biotech, you're actually front and center, and you're the one who's driving the strategy. So all of that information and understanding around general disease, whether that be an oncology or an infectious disease and whatever, I could bring that sort of knowledge to that decision, that decision making, and fixing the strategy. So to your point, Nucana and Bergen Bio, you're coming into a company that it's at different stages, as you said, sort of thing. So they'll have a story, they'll maybe have a mode of action. You're either sort of putting some regulatory rigor, to that, because that what's required for approval, or you're basically fixing the strategy. Because what a lot of early biotech companies do, they almost do that shotgun approach, where they're trying to hit every single indication that mode of action or that target is involved in. But ultimately, what you need to do is you need to get them to focus. And it goes then from a drug development point of view is the medical need and the opportunity. So it's no different to where we are with specifically Virax. Now, although we might be a little bit earlier on, the pathway to approval is an awful lot shorter. When I say it's an awful lot shorter, it's within, a year and a half to 2 years to IVD. Don't get me wrong, the hurdles are there specifically because, again, we want to get a marking that you can actually, it's not just for information, but it's certainly something that you can do, either have a drug intervention or an intervention sort of medically later on, sort of thing. So I don't see that we're too early on in the process. To James's point, I think we've got a nice platform that we can identify with our approach the specific pathogens. Because a lot of the time, because we're exposed to lots of different viruses through our life, whether that be Epstein-Barr, it's usually about 80% of people have had that, cytomegalovirus, we've all been exposed to viruses and we've got them in there because they tend to lie dormant, sort of thing, or whatever. I think what James was going back to around that platform is that we have the ability to identify that virus with the test that was specifically got. So when we look at the activation of those T cells, that's specific to that virus. And we've talked about this T-cell exhaustion part of it, and that plays a key role because in many instances, although the body does a great job, the adaptive immune system does a great job of either creating antigens to dampen down the actual pathogen or creates T cells to destroy it, in some instances, the body can't destroy the pathogen. So what it says, okay, I'm going to basically just keep it in check. Now, the problem with keeping it in check is that when you then come up with another viral infection or something like that, your body, your adaptive immune is not as functional and effective as dealing with it as it would have normally been. And this is where the likes of that T-cell exhaustion and some of the symptoms that you see around, say, chronic fatigue, chronic inflammation, which we know is not a good thing for the general health of someone. And again, if you look at it, and I'll only use HIV as an example, we've been able to actually, with drugs and stuff like that, deal and look after people who are suffering, who have got the HIV infection. It's not gone. It's usually dormant, so you're keeping it in check. And whatever, and it's a similar type of thing we've seen with COVID, SARS-CoV, with respect to, some of these long COVID symptoms that we've seen. And again, I'd mentioned, ME or, chronic fatigue syndrome. People have been living with that for years and years, and it's been undiagnosed. I think what we feel that we can do is we can actually help with that early detection. And in doing so, there have been drugs developed in long COVID and post-viral syndromes, but even just our general, how we actually manage our diet and our lifestyle can be helpful as well.
Yeah, I was wondering as well, because I mean, I feel like we've talked a lot about Virax already, but I was wondering, James, if you could elaborate a little bit more on the core mission and the vision for Virax overall. Like, where do you see things going with the organization as it continues to evolve?
Yeah, I think we sort of alluded to it earlier on in the piece. Insofar as I've always seen Virax as a mission-driven company, and we're looking at solving big problems and improving patient outcomes on what we hope to be a very large scale. And to Nigel's point previously with regards to T-cell exhaustion, chronic fatigue, and so on, our addressable market is potentially enormous. And that space is really being looked at right now. It's really a hot topic as relates to the FDA, the CDC. A lot of research work going on also in the United Kingdom. CDC just came out with a study a few weeks ago, in December, I'm sorry, which indicated that something within the region of 1.9% of Americans are living with chronic fatigue right now, which is about 3.3 million people. So this is those are the only ones that have been diagnosed. We don't know, right? We don't know clearly. There's presumably many more who are undiagnosed over and above that. So these are really big issues that patients are living with globally, and that's really part and parcel of what Virax is really trying to achieve, which is these improved patient outcomes, but on a scale that's significant enough where we can make a really big difference to people's lives. I think the key, our key platform, to be specific, for folks who don't necessarily know the company, is that our T-cell testing platform is called Virax Immune, which we've alluded to a few times. It's development stage. To kind of strip that out, technically, Virax Immune, that is. So what we're primarily developing is a comprehensive set of immune profiling IVDs, and the indications we're interested in looking at are post-viral syndromes, as well as potentially in the future CAR T-cell therapies. Very specifically, our initial IVD is going to be focused around the early detection and diagnosis of long COVID, and we're looking to then pivot that to look at other post-viral syndromes and other chronic fatigue, such as ME. What's interesting about chronic fatigue and T-cell exhaustion is that regardless of technological advances in diagnostics, there aren't really diagnostic tests available for these, and this is especially been evident. I think we can all see post-pandemic, because there's so many individuals that have had this long COVID symptoms. As I mentioned before, that CDC study has indicated that over 3 million people just in the US are experiencing these chronic fatigue syndromes, which presumably a large number of those are actually long COVID sufferers without really realizing it. But even despite all that, and despite the numbers that we're talking about, there's still no really solid diagnostic options, and which would then lead into kind of therapeutics and so on, to assist patient outcomes around this. And that's pretty remarkable, actually, when you think about it, and the numbers that are currently involved. So I'm not sure if you and your audience are fully versed, but given that long COVID's been around since 2020, you would think that this would continue to grow due to the virus, due to the massive exposure of the virus, or as a result of the COVID vaccination. We believe that about 1% to 2% of the global population, generally speaking, might be suffering from post-viral syndromes or immune-mediated inflammatory diseases. As we mentioned before, in the region of 19 million people in the US, 38 million in Europe, so that includes the UK, are being currently affected by long COVID. And so that's a massive story in a variety of different ways. It's not just in terms of improving patient lives, but if you think of it from a corporate or government perspective, There's so many folks who aren't able to work as a result of this. Governments are being affected by welfare payments and so on, due to massive unemployment as a result of these syndromes. And again, there's no good diagnostic options as relates to this to help into the diagnosis, and then the drug, to Nigel's points, those potential therapeutic options, or drug companies coming in and making, affecting these chronic issues. And so to go back to your point and your question about the mission of the company, this is really the space that we always wanted to be in. We wanted to be in a space where we could affect something globally, in an innovative way, at scale, as I mentioned. And long COVID is one of those things, because, like I said, I'd be surprised. I would be surprised if you didn't know someone, or you had a member of your own family who'd been affected by this. And the fact that we're able to play a part in potentially resolving it is really part of what I see as Virax's key core mission, and what we really want to end up doing. So I think, to sort of conclude on that, without sort of getting into too many divergent paths, is really what we're really about at Virax is providing these potential positive patient outcomes. We want to be a helpful company in what is a difficult post-pandemic world, and we see that our innovative technology is being a potentially critical component in doing that. And if we can assist the world in getting better, for want of a better phrase, that would be excellent. And as I said, if we can make money in the process of doing that, then that's wonderful too.
Yeah, absolutely. So Nigel, I wanted to come back to you, mostly to focus on one specific area that you brought up earlier, which is companion diagnostics. Because you've worked on both sides, right? The drug side as well as the diagnostic side now, can you talk a little bit more about, what is a companion diagnostic, one, and then two, what is the importance of them, especially whenever you're looking at, a specific treatment, as well?
Sure. So it's interesting. Although I don't look it, I've been working in the pharma industry for about 30 years. It's interesting when I started, developing drugs. You were lucky, and I was more focused around the drug metabolism side of things. But you were lucky with most drugs that were developed. If you're lucky, 40% of the population was treated.
Mm-hmm.
I.e., that 60% of the population, the drug just didn't work. Whether that was because of the dose or just because of other things, Now, what we know, and we talked about this technology, the ability to sequence people, to look at specific genetics, genomics, and then you realize when you think about the disease, there's many things that drive disease, and certainly some of those is genetics sort of thing. So this is where this whole precision medicine, this is where the whole sort of, stratification of the population has been going over the last 15, 20 years. So to your point, companion diagnostics, when I started, I mentioned I did pharmacogenetics. The only biomarkers that were available then were looking at polymorphisms in your drug metabolizing enzymes, with respect to, what sort of dose you gave. But obviously, as that's expanded and whatever, this whole biomarker thing has come. And then when you think about the FDA and a lot of the regulatory people, they basically said, right, if you're developing drugs, and any drug that comes onto the market, it needs to be better than what's, what the standard of care is. So it either needs to be more efficacious, and it also needs to be safer. But what we also want you to do is we want you to define and show to us the population that this drug is going to act on. So this is where the companion diagnostics came along, because drugs were being developed with a companion diagnostic, because that was needed and required, specifically in oncology, but also even outside oncology, to identify that population. And this is where the whole technology and the ability to work with data has come into. So companion diagnostics of something certainly has been evolving over the last number of years, but certainly the last 10 to 15 years, it is a requirement that when you come to for approval, that you will understand your target and you'll understand the dose, and then you'll also understand the population. This is where companion diagnostics come from. So with respect to the companion diagnostics, or where we see where we fit into that. So we're talking about early diagnosis. So when you talk about biomarkers and stuff that you can diagnose, and you can actually have a companion diagnostic, a prognostic marker as well. With respect to the viral, what we're wanting to do is we're wanting to identify, people who have been exposed to a virus and have got a post-viral syndrome. When we look at their T cells that have been triggered as a result of that post-viral syndrome, that we can actually say, hey, look, the makeup of this person is they have got this T cell exhaustion and just chronic inflammation, and we need to treat that. And we want to catch it early because, as you said, we don't want to get to the point, where it's the whole immune system's hardwired itself and it's staying that way, sort of thing. Now, we talked about CAR T, and we're when you think about oncology, and CAR T, if you remember what CAR T is it's certainly in a lot of hematological cancers, where we know that the interesting thing, and the thing that's always interested me, and is why some people get cancer and some people don't.
Oh, sure.
Some people who smoke a lot of cigarettes get nothing, and some people who don't. Now ultimately it's how some of the things it's to do with your immune system and how it sees that pathogen, how it deals with it. Now, when you think about CAR Ts, especially hematological cancers, what you're doing is you're basically taking the T cells out of a person, you're manipulating them, putting them back in to kill the specific sort of cancer sort of thing. Now, it's super expensive. It works for some people, but it's super expensive. Plus, there's a lot of safety aspects, because you hear about these cytokine storms where where the immune system starts to attack all of the other organs as well, because there's just now what we believe when we're talking about CAR T cells, usually at the moment with CAR T cells, they come after first line treatment. So you've had chemotherapy, you've had radiotherapy. Now, what they're trying to do now is rather than having specific T cells for specific people, taking them out, manufacturing them, putting them back in, super expensive, 400,000-500,000, just for it. Now, society can't pay for that in a big scale sort of thing. So now they're wanting to go allogenic, which is off the shelf. Can you generally take T cells and then use those T cells off the shelf to help treat people? Now, in this instance, now you've got a slightly different problem, because how you dose, the amount of T cells you dose, you can actually have a real effect on the safety aspects of this cytokine storm. But also then, if patients are receiving chemotherapy and radiotherapy before, and their T cells are exhausted, and they're not doing what you really want to know about that, because ultimately that patient would be better getting another treatment rather than that. So I think we feel that, in relation to CAR T, we most probably feel that we can actually help with that as well, sort of thing, whatever. That's more around how to dose, and the doses of CAR T cell and the management of that as well, sort of thing. So I think we know the immune system is complex and the adaptive immune system is complex, but we feel that we can actually utilize some aspects of that to help with the treatment management. And as you mentioned with the whole technology thing, when we start to bring other pieces into it, wherever, to try and understand how the adaptive immune system is either, looking to affect, some sort of tumor microenvironment from an oncology point of view, or an infectious disease, that we can actually sort of bring lots of different things together around the general treatment management to really drive either how we treat oncology or how we treat these post-viral syndromes.
Yeah. And I mean, I just think it's a really important point to cover, because a lot of times we talk about companion diagnostics on the show. And I mean, frankly, I sort of believe that most people understand the importance of them, but at the same time, with regards to this, I think that the future of a lot of these platforms, whenever you have a very specific cancer treatment, we talked, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago about personalized healthcare. And now we're at a point where we could say, hey, actually, the reality is you could have a very focused diagnostic that, looks at you specifically and how that treatment will work with you. And I think it's a very important point also to talk about the regulatory aspect of, why do you need these things? What's the importance as well? Yeah. So James, I wanted to come back to you. What is the greatest leadership advice that you've ever received?
Yeah, I got this question prior to the interview, so I had a good think about it. Nigel said a few inspiring things, so I was thinking, should I do that? Yeah, that's true. That would be kind of cheesy. So I looked up a quote. I have these sort of bits and pieces in my records from my student days, but it was a quote from Jack Welch. It's not advice, so to speak, but more of a quote. And he said words along the lines of, good business leaders create a vision, they articulate that vision, they passionately own that vision, and they relentlessly drive to build that vision to completion. And I think that really kind of resonated with me. And I think I would like to think that's something that I really buy into. I'm not sure if you've seen it today, but I like to think of myself as being kind of passionate about what we're doing and what we're trying to achieve. And I think as a good leader, if you could put all those kind of things together, I think you have the core of what fundamentally and philosophically a company really should be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's something to stay really locked on that vision as well, and not sort of give it up for other shiny objects that fall into our view. That's the one thing that's, I think, extremely tough today is the level of visibility that you have on, kind of your overall environment could lead you away from where your vision really is pointing you to as well.
Yeah, well, I think, back to the point that we've sort of made numerous times throughout this piece is that innovation piece is right in the center of what we're doing, and no matter what. So whether in terms of what Nigel was talking about, CAR T-cell or these kind of chronic fatigue, or even possibilities within companion diagnostics, to your point, at the core of what we will always do will be that innovation piece. But certainly within that core innovation piece, there's also that business piece, like I said before, which is that execution piece. And that's part of Nigel coming in, and helping us scale the company onto that next level, because we're aware that, we think we're very strong on the R&D side. Now it's that that part where we bring in that business piece, that commercialized piece, that regulatory piece, and our ability to execute upon that is going to lead the company either being what we want it to be or not, I believe. And so that's kind of the core piece for us, generally speaking.
Very good. Nigel, what's the greatest leadership advice that you've ever received?
For me, Nigel, why don't you listen? No, no. I think from my point of view, I'm a scientist, and I've been a scientist all my days and stuff and things like that, and whatever, and you go through lots of leadership things and whatever, and I think applying emotional intelligence, even as a scientist, is super important, and effective communication. And when I say effective communication is, we're talking about complex things, and we, we talk to different people. Those could be KOLs within the field, or they could be analysts, they could be, general public and stuff like that. And over the years, what I've learned is, what I think I'm saying and how it's being communicated is not always the case. And it's know your audience. And basically, and this is where the emotional intelligence comes in as well, sort of thing, when you're forming that team and you're trying to go from A to B and stuff like that. It's super important to apply that leadership quality. And the other thing I mentioned to you before, effective decision making is super important. And that's what I've learned. Over the years, you can see things, and I mentioned to you before, how you make decisions and how effectively and efficiently you make the decisions as a leader is super important, because it really does affect the organization and whatever, especially in biotech within these, challenging times financially with respect to fundings and stuff and things like that.
Yeah, it's funny to me because I feel like the most successful leaders know like when they need to make a decision themselves, when they need to sort of broaden their perspective and let the team make the decision. And maybe they contribute, or maybe they sort of sit back and let the team interact with, the data that's available. But I also think it's very important that once the decision is made, you decide to move, right? There's no more debate, no more sort of, ongoing discussion. And I feel like that's one of the things that I see in a lot of very young companies, where you continually come back to the same decision over and over again. Had to take a cough break there. Sorry.
We'll forgive you.
James, wanted to come back to you and ask one of the three standard questions that I have in the podcast. What inspires you?
I think you could probably tell by my previous answers and what I've sort of alluded to throughout this piece is it's okay. I've always been really inspired by great founders and entrepreneurs. That's something that I grew up with from a relatively young age, and seeing these companies being developed from day one to day 1,000 to 10,000 is really what I've always been really interested in, not just from a career perspective, but from a personal perspective from a very early age. I'm sort of somewhat controversial, and I'm certainly not alluding to any politics here, to be clear. But I'm currently reading Elon Musk's autobiography. I don't know if you've read it. Walter Isaacson, the author. But from a purely business perspective, the way that he went about trying to resolve very large problems, and his thought process and how he went around executing that. I find that type of story very inspiring. In other ways, I don't find the man that inspiring, but that's the conversation perhaps for another day. So.
Yeah, I think I think there are definitely things to take away from, looking at what he's created and, kind of the overall platforms that he's developed. I think there are great things that, as well, that you could sort of take away and say, hey, look, from an innovator standpoint, definitely inspiring as well. And yeah, I completely agree with you. There are other aspects where you go, look, as a total individual, maybe not as inspiring, but also, there are certain aspects where we could take away.
We can't all be perfect like Nigel, unfortunately. I think the key with Elon Musk, and what I find particularly interesting personally, was that his skills were transferable into other business areas, if you see what I mean. He moved from financial services into more biotech and more more technologically focused industries, but he kept his kind of core principles throughout, which is a similar way that I look at business as well. I mean, innovation was really at the heart of every single piece that he put together in all of his businesses, regardless of what particular industry that he was in, which I think is, it's very interesting. And for anyone who wants to be a kind of business leader, if you look at those as an innovator anyway, if you look at those facets, I think that, clearly that's, taking him far, and it'll take anybody far.
Absolutely. Nigel, how about you? What inspires you?
I have to say, I don't need to get up out of bed in the morning. I love doing what I do. And making a positive difference in people's lives with respect to how their health is managed, to me, whether it's a drug, that I'm developing, in oncology or infectious disease, or whether it's a diagnostic, where I'm trying to help somebody that's the thing that gets me up in the morning. Now, along that journey, I love working with super intelligent people, because you can feed off them, sort of thing. And that has inspired me for the last 30 years, sort of thing. So, I'm excited, about working in Virax Biolabs, because I've sort of transitioned and moved over, because that knowledge that I've gained doing drug development, I realize one of the most important things is to diagnose early before it gets too far, whether it's whether it's a cancer which is branched out sort of thing and it's become metastatic, or whether it's an infection, wherever which has gone a wee bit too far. That is super, super important. And I think that will be a huge help to both the individual as well as society. The question is how we can do that without it being such a big social burden on on economically for governments and for countries and stuff, like, to be able to get that early detection. But I think that we can fit somewhere quite nicely into the different health systems and work with those healthcare providers to do something that, to me, I think it's great. And I think, from now until the day I die, I think that's the thing that really gets me up in the morning, sort of thing. So.
Yeah, it's funny because I mean, most of my early education was centered around physical objects, and like how do you engineer electronics, or how do you engineer things that essentially you could touch and see in this world. And now working with brilliant people with things that you really aren't touching, the inner parts of a cell. You're having to design something that essentially goes and does it. And the brilliance that comes into this sort of discussion, whether it's on the diagnostic side or the drug side, is for me as well inspiring. So Nigel, I wanted to stay with you. So what concerns you?
Look, I worked in infectious disease. The only thing that surprised me about SARS-CoV, that it was a virus and it wasn't a bacteria that was causing the pandemic, sort of thing. So, what concerns me, is that viral and bacterial infections are going to continue, and they'll continue to be a major problem. I think the problem people don't realise, and it's only a couple of generations ago that you could go out in the garden and prick your finger on a rose bush and die of an infection, sort of thing. And the reality is that we haven't developed any antibiotics in the last 20, 40 years. And whether we like it or not, and we've seen this with the virus, whether it's a bacterial infection or whether it's a viral infection, resistance is built up for many different reasons. And I think what concerns me, yes, I think we'll be able to do. Well, we've done a good job of creating vaccines, and I'm sure, I know the governments are concentrating on the bacterial side of things. Even when we do that, what I can say, and my concern is these chronic inflammatory or post-viral syndrome things are going to get more and more and more, even if we do treat the infections themselves, and that will be a massive burden on the healthcare systems. And the question is there something that we can do, to help alleviate that? Because if it's not, then it's going to be a massive problem. Not necessarily for us, but certainly for our children and going forward, because I think it's just going to be crippling.
Absolutely. James, what concerns you?
Yeah, I to kind of follow on from Nigel's point, the fact is, with regards to antibiotics or biotech in general, the kind of problems that companies like ours are trying to solve are fundamental for humanity itself. And I think if the issues within global finance, in terms of interest rates and so on, and earlier stage companies, I should say, than ours, folks who are out there trying to innovate, who are trying to bring these new drugs, companion diagnostics, or whatever it might be, therapeutics to the commercial stage, aren't really able to do this to such a great degree because of high interest rates and just a general difficulty in the business environment. That's going to be an ongoing problem, globally for a very long time, and it's not exactly going to help. If you want to talk about antibiotics specifically, to commercialize an antibiotic there isn't really a great pathway for that to happen, and with interest rates being as they are, higher for longer, as they say, the chances that a biotech or a company, an early stage company would look to try and commercialize something around that is just it's not highly likely unless a government steps in with a kind of subsidy program or something of that nature. So if we cannot, on a global scale, get past these issues with inflation, interest rates, and so on, and we get back to to a place where financing institutions are going to become ready to invest in riskier earlier stage ventures, then I think it's going to affect our industry, and every industry for that matter, from a technological perspective, for a long time. And so I mean, as I understand it, over the next, from what they tell me in the financial press, in the next 6 months, that's going to ease off, and hopefully that will, and we'll start to see more companies dive into venture capital funding and early stage seed capital and so on, so we can see more ideas and more innovations within our space, and every technical space for that matter.
Absolutely. James, let's stay with you. So what excites you?
Well, talking to you, obviously, first and foremost. I think this sounds incredibly cheesy, and you're probably going to hate me for answering in this way, but I'm genuinely really excited about Virax and where we are in 2024. I think we're in a really good spot in terms of Virax Immune. I would encourage anybody who's listening to the show to, or watching for that matter, to have a look at our site, to have a look at our documentation, see where we are, and see where we're taking it. We think we have a great, manufacturing facility, lab facility that we've put together. We think we have a great R&D team. We have a really clear route, we think, to IVD through regulatory in the not too distant future, as Nigel alluded to previously. And I think 2024 for us is going to look really, really interesting. And in solving the problems that we hope to solve, I think that we're going to make a lot of people's lives, significantly better as a result of that. So I think that's what really excites me, and that's what I'm sitting here on January 4th, really looking forward to this year with the company.
Very good. And Nigel, how about you? What excites you?
Look, I'm a scientist guy. We talked about the technology and the ability to generate sort of data. I think it's only going to increase. And we talked about whether it's cancer, whether it's oncology, whether it's infectious disease, it's complex. So of course we are looking at one aspect or some aspects of those symptoms and whatever, So I would imagine that ability to bring different things together and have a real sort of effect on people's lives is going to be super exciting in the future, and to be part of that and to bring our sort of contribution specifically to that is going to be super important. I think the other thing that excites me is that I think people in general are a lot more interested in their health.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they're realizing, that they can actually do an awful lot, whether it's lifestyle, diet, and whatever, and things like that, that to help both themselves, both within the now, the present, but also in the future. Now, I think, we've not talked about this, and we don't talk about this sort of, the ability, because, people want to take a little bit more control. But certainly one of the things we're looking at is looking to help provide people with information that is helpful to them in that sort of journey as well. Because when you talk about inflammation, in general inflammation, inflammation is not a great thing. Certainly chronic inflammation is not a great thing. And there's things that we can do, from our lifestyle, for what we eat and whatever, that we can have an effect on that. And I think, to James's point, we're concentrating on these post-viral syndromes, but we also, hope to, somehow help with that as well, to help inform people. And we talked about this at this. We're in the UK. You've got the National Health Service, and you've got private health, and it's very similar in different countries and stuff like that. The question is can you provide helpful information, to sit somewhere in between, that people are willing to go with information to their GP, which is helpful both to the person but also to the GP to help with that sort of thing. That's the sort of thing that we're really excited about. So in our journey that we're talking about, getting and speaking with those healthcare providers, whether they be in the UK or the US, to partner with them along that journey is going to be super exciting and super, super important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, James and Nigel, thank you so much for coming on the Life Science Success podcast and sharing with us about Virax Labs, and especially thank you for being, on the first episode of 2024. So thanks a lot for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you
It's
very
been
much.
our great pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for listening to Life Science Success. For complete details about this podcast, including show notes, how to get in touch with guests, and more episodes, please visit www.lifesciencesuccess.com. If there's someone you'd like for us to invite to the show as a guest, please let me know by sending me a message at the podcast website. Please click subscribe on your favorite podcast app, share the podcast, or tell a friend about it, and last but not least, rate the podcast. Thank you again.